All right, guys. This morning I'm with Corinne Gist, and we are going to talk about learning. So I met Corinne through Kara. Kara and Corinne have worked together for a little while now, and she has a company called Fit Learning. And I was super interested to see how that's all intertwined. So, again, thanks for joining us this morning, Corinne. And do you mind introducing yourself a little bit for everybody watching, listening?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So my name is Corinne Gist, and I am the owner and founder of Fit Learning Cleveland. So I am an affiliate of a bigger system. There is a core learning lab out in Reno, Nevada, and New York has a couple, and then I'm an offshoot of them. So I use their curriculum and was trained by them, and then opened this center about 2 years ago. And my background, I started in an undergrad in education. I then went on to grad school for school psychology and worked in a variety of settings, public school, day treatment centers as a school psychologist. And then during that time, I also got my certification as a board certified behavior analyst. So that is applied behavior analysis, which is really the behavioral science, the science of how people behave and how people learn. And I really enjoyed that role so much so that I kind of quit my life about 5 years ago and moved to Ohio State, got my PhD in behavioral science, and it was there that I found Fit Learning. So when I graduated, I moved back to Cleveland and opened my center.
So, how'd you find Fit Learning? And then what is this like aha moment where you're like, I'm going to open one of these in Cleveland?
Okay, great question. So we are an academic skill building program. So we fall under tutoring in that we're supplemental to the school day for most learners. We do have a few homeschool learners that come to us for multiple subjects, but we are typically supplemental to the school day. So kids go to school and then come to us. That is kind of where the similarities with other tutoring centers ends. So we don't do homework help. Our goal is to build up the students' fundamental academic skills to a level that is fluent. So when they come in, I do an assessment and we are looking at all those basic fundamental skills you need to be successful in whichever subject area. So let's say we're looking at mathematics. I'm starting with, do you know place value? Can you read numbers? Can you write numbers? And then we look at all the different multiplication and division, addition and subtraction, and kind of work our way up. And the whole purpose is that we want to make sure that there's no holes in those fundamental skills. So we are developing a curriculum that's specific to that learner that's targeting the areas that they need.
That's pretty interesting. So, and we had talked a bit previous to this, but why, like, how does the word fit come in? Like, I hear some things like the principal stuff of foundations were like, well, with strength training, right? You have to have you know, certain fundamental skill sets to be able to progress to the next skill set. And I kind of get that progression. How's it fit into the brand and the model?
That's a great question. So we are talking about cognitive fitness. So that's where Fit Learning comes in. And we are very aligned with teaching the way that sports coaches teach and that you learn a musical instrument, right? So we're working on those basic fundamental skills. So you think about soccer and you go to soccer practice. And regardless if you're professional or you're just learning, you're going to work on those fundamental skills. So passing, shooting, dribbling, being able to control the ball, all of that is worked on. And not just are you practicing it so that you're accurate, but you're practicing it so that you're quick and you're able to execute it quickly and accurately and properly, right? So that's typical when we're thinking about sports, when we're thinking about music, when you're learning an instrument, you're practicing multiple days a week and you're working on those fundamental skills. Unfortunately, our academic system is not built that way. So in schools, there is more of a focus on content rather than on being competent in those skills. So what we see happen is that students never become fluent in their addition and subtraction facts, which they should be in first, second grade. And then as they get into third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, they're doing multi-digit addition and subtraction. They're getting into algebra. They have this cumulative disfluency because they don't have those basic skills. So now that's going to continue to hurt them as they grow. So what our job and our goal is to make sure all of those fundamental skills are fluent. So we do that by looking at rate. So how many can they do in a minute? And then by doing repeated deliberate practice that's then reinforced. So we know that's how everybody learns. Any habit is built, any behavior is learned. It's by repeated practice with it and then that being reinforced. So that's what we're doing here.
So when you say like in the normal school system, it's different. In what way? Like, is it just because the school system is pushing out things to big groups of people and kind of come along for the ride or you don't? Or is it the way it's actually like the curriculum's developed, like the actual content itself?
So it's both. Our school system really hasn't changed since it was developed over a century ago. So there's a push on teach them more earlier. And so there's so much content that there isn't time to train certain skills to fluency. There's also issues with just the way we train our teachers. They're not usually trained in behavioral science and the way of learning. So they're not giving the students aren't given the opportunity to practice the skills until they have them where they need to be. So you think about another piece is grade excellence when you move up a grade, right? So just because you turn 8 doesn't mean that you have all the skills needed for first grade and you should go to second. So we're moving kids based on how old they are, regardless of if they have those skills needed. So a little bit of what you were saying is kids are getting moved on before they have all those basic skills, but also we're not giving them enough time and practice, and we're not teaching them in a way that builds fluency so that they can have those skills as they move up. And then COVID has obviously just escalated that times 100.
COVID's messing everything up. Yeah, so it's interesting to me. I I don't live in the education world, so I guess I've never thought of it that way. Um, but like we've said with CrossFit, we've always wanted to create like a belt system, almost like karate, where you have to test out, right? Like you have to be able to do XYZ, you have to do it fluently, and then you get the next belt. Well, in CrossFit, you're not allowed to do a snatch until you show full overhead mobility and that you can do a squat, snatch balance, and then you can do an overhead press, and like you have those fundamental skills, and then now you can do the next one, right? And you kind of build. And I guess to a degree, that's kind of happening in schools, or no? Like
it's not happening in schools. They're moving them on before they have those
before they have it.
So you think about, so when I opened PHYT, I had 4 degrees. I found PHYT learning during my doctoral studies, and the way they applied our behavioral science and then with education just was an aha. Like, this is it. This is how everyone should be doing it. It kind of became a blessing and a curse because now I know how to accelerate kids and their learning, but it's driving me nuts that other people aren't doing it this way. So trying to, get the word out about how we do it. But in order for anyone to be a coach here and work with our kids, they have to be fluent in all the skills. So we have years of research that show aims, meaning a certain amount of responses in a minute probably indicates fluency. And then we measure for fluency. So just because you hit aim doesn't necessarily mean you're fluent, but it predicts that you probably are. So we then say, okay, you did it for a minute. Can you keep up that endurance and do it for 2 to 3 minutes? Okay, we've been practicing this skill every day. We're going to not practice for a week, for a month, and see if you can keep up that same rate. And then once you're fluent, you can now do those higher level skills.
What kind of things are you talking about? Like you're saying you got to hit certain targets or whatever. Like, are we talking
so
math problems? Or are we talking word recognition? What is
everything?
This? Everything.
So
okay.
If we're talking about math, so the aim for addition subtraction is 50 problems in a minute. So we want our learners to be able to do 50 problems in a minute. Once they do, then we're looking for all these outcomes and we're saying, okay, great, you passed that program, you're fluent, we're going to move on to the next skill. But we keep coming back to make sure that skill is retained, and they do, because we have enough data and research to know where the students need to be. So when I opened PHYT, I was not fluent in my multiplication and division facts because it was just something that I had never trained
Very
to
valid.
fluency. And so I was practicing, I have a niece who at the time was in second grade, and we're sitting next to each other doing our multiplication and division so that I could be a coach, because all of our coaches are fluent in everything we teach. Yeah, so it's a big fundamental problem. And had I known now had I known when I was studying for the GRE what I know now, my math score would have been significantly better. I studied so much for the GRE and the math piece, and I'm trying to remember how to do these formulas when really what was taking me so long was the multiplication and division and addition subtraction that I was never fluently taught in. I am now, but I wasn't at the time. But
Yeah.
the CrossFit connection that's kind of what got Kara and I talking so much. And then I took a kipping clinic at Seatown West with Coach Adam, and it was exactly what you're talking about, breaking it down. So we started with working on the floor and working on hollows and supermans, and then we worked on our grip, and then we worked on the shoulders before you put it all together. And so that is how people in sports and in music teach and learn, yet that has not transferred over to how we teach academic skills.
It's very interesting. What's the endurance piece? Like you mentioned, if you can do it in a minute, now can you do it for 2 or 3? What's the science behind that?
Yeah, so just making sure you can keep up the pace. So maybe not quite as important with math, but well, I shouldn't say that. It is still important with math. But you think about reading. So a lot of the times when we're training word reading, we break it down by phonics skills. So we'll just do short vowel words, then we'll just do long vowel words, and then we'll do cumulative slices and build up from there. And then we do reading a story words per minute, and we typically train that around a minute. But if you can read 120 words in a minute, that's great. But if I give you 5 minutes and now you need to read a longer passage and your rate dips, right, then you're not a fluent reader. We don't want you to be exhausted from reading. And if you are exhausted just from decoding words, then you're not able to comprehend what you're reading. So we do those longer periods of time just to check and make sure that you have that endurance for those skills.
What's the physiology of that? Like if I have a runner that can't run, a certain pace for 10 minutes, and I go, okay, well, we need to be able to do XYZ blood exchange, whatever. We got to work on this metabolic energy system so that you can clear lactic acid, use oxygen, right? Like we can go down that from a fitness side. Is it understood, the physiology in the brain, or is it just kind of we practice, we get better?
It's just like building any other habit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know our research shows that as you build habits, your brain changes. You have that. We're trying to make that permanence
Mm-hmm.
in the brain. So it's just like building up any other habit. It's the practice, which then makes you able to do it for longer periods of time. Is that what you're asking?
Kind of. Like, so I guess where I'm coming from, brain neurodegenerative diseases, chronic pain, all that kind of jazz, like it has an inflammatory component. And I think I mentioned to you last time we talked, they can look at endurance athletes, and if you give them a cognitive task while they're doing a run or a bike or whatever, they tap out of the endurance event sooner because of that brain demand. So it's almost like there's an energy fatigue system of the brain where is it metabolic buildup? Is it inflammatory buildup? Something's happening that the brain's like, okay, we're done. I was just curious if that happens with just straight, is it the exercise component plus the cognition, or is it just like cognitive? And if it's inflammatory or if it's fatigue, I don't know that data even exists. That's
Right.
where my brain's going.
I don't know if you want to come do some studies on our you're welcome to do that. I think I just think it's like anything else. When the skill's harder for you and you're not fluent at it, it's more exhausting because you're more energy to it. So once it becomes kind of automatic or effortless, some of the words that we put with fluency, you're just able to do that longer. You practice up to that place.
Yeah. I've never thought about it before. Like, why do you get exhausted? Like, what is it? Is it inflammation? Is it metabolic fatigue? Is it lazy? Like, what is it? I wonder what that is.
I don't know. I mean, I think if I'm thinking, like writing my dissertation for hours, I was exhausted after that. Yeah. So
Right.
I don't know. The
You
question
hear
for,
uh, the like mental geniuses that wear the same outfit every day, so it's one less decision they have to make,
right,
right? Like
right. It's less.
decision fatigue.
Yep. Yeah. So I know how to build it so you can build the endurance. The why, I don't know.
I was just curious if there's
Yeah.
like science on that or not, because it'd be interesting. Again, people are starting to look at it from an endurance athlete's standpoint, it sounds like. And this comes from that book Endure. Alex Hutchinson is the researcher. um, like is the science the same for the endurance athlete, not the science, the physiology, the same for the endurance athlete as it is the cognition learner side? um I don't know, tangent,
I
but
don't know. I mean, I
interesting.
know they both change your brain, right? They both make changes in there, whether they're similar changes, I don't know.
Yeah, just
The other
interesting.
Yeah, the other piece that we look at is distraction. So you think about if you're fluent in a skill, you can do it when there's distraction around you.
My wife
Um,
would say I'm not fluent in anything.
well, like the example I always like to give is if I ask you to say the alphabet right now
Uh-huh.
and I start singing Mary Had a Little Lamb, you're going to be able to say the alphabet, right? Like
Uh-huh.
you're fluent in that skill, you know it doesn't take much effort. If I ask you to say it backwards, and then I start singing Mary Had a Little Lamb, that's going to be a lot more difficult for you. That distraction is going to affect your ability to do it because you're not fluent. It's not an
Mm-hmm.
effortless skill that you've practiced and has been reinforced. So we work on that as well. Think about a kid who at home can do the math facts or can do the homework, and then they're in the classroom and they're not able to get it done. And part of that, it might be if they have all their concentration and they have all the time, yes, I can get this skill done when it's silent. But you're putting me in a more realistic environment, and this I'm not fluent enough to do it with all of this distraction, and then they might get
Interesting.
frustrated. So a lot of times that are kids that are disfluent, that comes out. You see some behaviors that are often associated with ADHD or behavioral issues, and it's all stemming from just this lack of fluency in these fundamental skills. So typically in our setting, all our sessions are one-on-one. There's a coach and a learner, but they're all in the same room so that we're building up some of that distraction. Now, COVID has, made it made that a little bit more difficult, but we still have doors open. We're in separate rooms, but the doors are open. And that's not to say every kid starts there. We do have some learners that just aren't ready for that, need to learn some of the
Mm-hmm.
skills of how to learn, or just need to build up a little bit more accuracy before they can start working on that fluency with distraction. But that's another thing that we work on to build that fluency.
So you kind of like pump in crowd noise, like the football team of.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's again, like I always kind of link it back to some of the stuff we do in therapy and rehab, but like dual tasking is a big. You have somebody do a balance task, but then you make them talk to you while they're doing the balance task, and all of a sudden their balance goes, they lose their balance.
Yes.
So
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Or when I'm at, so I just started CrossFit in October, so I'm a newbie. But one of the coaches will come over and tell me to like focus on one part, right? So like focus on keeping your shoulders down. Then I'm focusing on that, and then my knees go in, or my, like I'm not fluent in this stuff, so it's hard to put it all together. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the fitness side, the question becomes, all right, so what things are most important to be fluent in, right? Like if I'm going to be a good human, what physical capabilities do I need? If I'm going to be a good CrossFitter, what physical capabilities do I need? And then you can break it out by sport or by like live, whatever. And from a learning standpoint, like what are the things that you like focus on, or what are those fluencies that are most important?
So we start from the bottom. So it comes in instructional design kind of comes into this. So knowing where to start and then how those skills build. So we refer to those basic fundamental prerequisite skills as tool skills. So that would be for math, that would be reading numbers, writing numbers, understanding place value, being able to do like expanded notation. And then I would probably move into like addition, subtraction, single digit. So those are our tool skills. Then we have what we call our component skills, those kind of like building block skills. So you have those tool skills. So I'm fluent in addition and subtraction. I got that. Now I can do multi-digit addition and subtraction. So those are our component skills. And then we have our overall composite skills. And the composite skills are like that higher level ultimate goal. So you're talking about a snatch. Being able to do the snatch would be my composite goal, or my composite skill, and then whatever the component skills and those tool skills. So I'm working with Kara because I lost a lot of strength over COVID, and all of my tool skills, as far as like core strength, hip mobility, all of that is just shot, right? So she's giving me exercises every week that are those basic tool skills, building up my core, doing some planks, doing some, I don't even know what they're called, but moving, building up that core and hip mobility. So
Yep.
I would call those tool skills. So then I can build onto those higher level skills. And it's the same thing with like that endurance piece, or even once you have these tool skills, I need to know how to do the snatch before I can add the weight. So it's that same kind of progression with academics. So with reading, one people don't think about is a lot of younger kids don't understand the difference between a vowel and a consonant. So which letters are vowels and which letters are consonants? Well, the whole way we teach phonics skills is by, if there's an E at the end, the vowel says its name. If there's no E, the vowel says its sound. Two consonants side by side is a blend. Well, if you're looking at the word and you don't know which ones are vowels and which ones are consonants, my rule means nothing to you, right? So those component basic skills we need to build up. And then Karen and I had a lot of conversations about writing, right? We have a penmanship where we just start with, can you pinch, right? Can you tap? And we'll have these kids who have had goals on their, in their education plan that's write their name for 4 years. They've never mastered it, but nobody's looked to say, well, why haven't they mastered it? Is it because they don't know how to hold a pencil, or they don't have the correct grip, or they don't know how to make correct lines? So it's all of those skills underneath that we're really focusing on before we can build up.
Yeah, that's like, I can relate to that so easily. Of like, again, if we kind of stick with that snatch Olympic weightlifting movement, you got to have the core, you got to have the flexibility to be able to get there, right? You have to be able to the strength to be able to do it, right? Those are kind of that tools, as you put it, right? But if I put you in a situation where you have less time, like in a CrossFit workout, or it's combined with something else, now it changes it. Or can you maintain that technique when you're tired, right? Like that changes it. So yeah, that's super interesting to me. And then of course, like you're saying, you break it down of, all right, well, barbell's not getting completely overhead. Well, is it your shoulder? Is it your hip? Is your mid back mobility? Like what is the foundational piece, or the skill set you're missing? So I guess I've never thought about it in learning. And I was like I was I was a good student. Like I didn't have to work that hard during school. I wouldn't say that I had to really struggle much with schooling. But you're going through that consonant vowel thing, and I'm like, I would fail this this skill
Yeah,
set.
well, a
I
lot of
am not
kids,
fluent.
yeah, a lot of kids were whole word readers, where I wasn't taught phonics. That wasn't a thing, even though
No.
the research for phonics has been around since the 70s. Um, just like all other fields, education doesn't always follow the science. So yeah, I had to relearn a lot of that when I started here, but it makes so much more sense when I come to new novel words I've never seen before. I would butcher them because I didn't understand how to sound them out correctly. So yeah, it's a big deal. 80% of, or 60% of third graders in our country are not fluent readers. And that
Wow.
is
That's a
research
big
done by our
number.
government. Yeah. And it's 80% when it comes to kids, to kids that are in low income homes. So it's a huge issue across the board.
Is that how like spelling bee, like super spelling bee kids, is that how they're able to do that? Is just through following rules?
I mean, there's probably some of the phonics there, but our language is so messed up that so many words don't follow. Our language is really hard to learn. Don't
Yeah.
follow the rules. So my guess is there's a lot of memorization going on there.
Yeah. That's always just, it's just wild to me that,
Yeah, no, I agree.
so now I'm wondering, like when I write, doing more blog posts now and articles and stuff, that like, I probably didn't work on my writing skills for several years. Like I had college stuff, but then I didn't really use high level writing. It was all shorthand, taking notes. um I make a lot of mistakes, like skip words all the time. My punctuation is terrible. My spelling is horrendous. And I wonder, like, as we talk, like how much of that is because there are baseline fundamental skills that I just blow past.
Well, we have a writing assessment, so I'm happy to check out your,
Be
your
fun.
skills.
I'd fail miserably, I'm sure. What
So we
percentage? Like, if you bring an adult in there and you're like, here, take this test, like the "Are you smarter than a fifth grader" thing, what happens?
so we don't well, we kind of do that with our coaches, right? So our
Uh
coaches will
huh.
do it and everything. So when they come in for an interview, I do a quick fluency, we call them fluency checks on some of the skills. I don't expect them to be fluent, but I expect them to be somewhat close, right? Because training is expensive for us to train a coach. It takes me a good 2 months to get a coach trained up to sit
Wow.
there with a kid, not just the fluency checks, but we collect data on every single timing and we're charting it on a chart. So you have to be able to be fluent in charting and talking and teaching and all of the things that go in a session. Um, so it really depends. So my interns are from John Carroll, and I would say I think almost all of them were totally fluent in math. They blew me out of the water. They
Wow.
sat down and they knew it. They're also a lot closer to college than I am. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, so the phonics rules, it depends on the learner. It depends on the adult learner, if they got phonics instruction as a kid or not. And then we have a logic curriculum that is all the prereq skills you need for comprehension. So understanding what people are saying to you, expressing yourself,
Mm.
reading comprehension, and then it's our expressive writing. And that's where that executive functioning comes in. So that's our logic. And that is really interesting because people are all over the board. I love logic. It was what I did my dissertation on. It's my favorite program. But I have a couple coaches who are great at the math, but they're not so interested in the logic. So it just kind of depends where everyone is. But we're able to train them up pretty quick because we know how to teach, right? So we teach our coaches the exact same way we teach our learners.
So, like, you see that in personalities, right? Like, do you think your math people become engineers and science people, and your logic people become people facing professions?
There might be some of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I just curious. Yeah.
You're
I, I
going towards
I
your
would
strength.
hope that I'm good at the logic. I would hope that I'm good at the logic side, but I think I would be miserable at the writing and the math side.
Well, yes. So the logic with the writing, it's more the creative writing piece.
Mm-hmm.
We have a grammar piece as well. But so our logic curriculum starts with describing, comparing, contrasting, sequencing, general and specific. So some of those real basic skills that then you need to become a great writer. So yeah, there's some creativity in there. So when I say similarities, I'll give you two items and I want you to tell me how they're similar for 15 seconds. So I want like 20 different ways that they're similar. So people can often say, if I say cat and dog, they can say they're both animals, they're both pets, right? But we're looking beyond that into, where you could find them, what you could find them with, what they might be doing, and expanding that repertoire so that you have a more cohesive vocabulary and connections when you go into your writing.
I love that. Do people do that in school? I don't think I've ever done.
No, typically the things that we teach in logic are only directly taught in school. Sometimes if a student has like a speech and language disorder on that language piece,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll get that. I mean, I think comparing, contrasting, and general and specific might be hit on, but not in the way that we're
That you're
attacking.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, right, that stuff becomes more important. I think. I mean, again, I'm not an expert on education, but like making those executive decisions, my whole career is, I shouldn't say this, but there's a part of it that's pattern recognition, right? Like, person walks in with this type of pain, it moves in this direction, you do this, it gets better. This is what you're going to do next, right? Like, you kind of, it's the whole decision making process. And we're supposed to use all these tests that aren't reliable anyway. Uh, so right, it does become some pattern recognition of making those like, um,
And some problem solving, right? So you're
oh, for
able to,
sure. Yeah. You're
that's
going
much,
through that whole puzzle of,
yeah. So
this
we'll
does
have,
this, does that.
I'll have a learner come in, the parent says, just do it all and then give me a recommendation. So I'll do an assessment for reading, math, and logic. And I often start with logic, even if there's some
Hmm.
deficits in other areas, because you need to understand categories, right? So you have to understand that vowels and consonants are different in order to learn that rule. You need categories and comparing and contrasting and temporal relations and spatial relations. So above, but below, next to, right, left, in front, bigger, smaller for math. So we often see that if we do a logic enrollment first, we can reduce the amount of time it takes to increase in math. And so across the board, we make a year's growth in 50 hours of instruction. We've replicated that. PHYT has replicated that for over 20 years across all the labs. We're very consistent. My average is actually a little bit higher than a year. We get about 2 years growth in 50 hours.
Wow.
And that's really easy to measure with reading and math because there's assessments we can use that are standardized that schools use. With logic, it's a little different. But what we've seen is on the reading comprehension measures, we're getting a year's growth just from a logic enrollment, not even working on the fundamental of reading, just working on that comprehension piece. That's
Wow.
part of why it's my favorite. It hits everything.
Yeah. And the skeptical side of me goes, in 10 years, like those basic things are going to be at your fingertips, right? Like my math skills are bad now because I don't even think anymore. I just go to my phone, right? Like I'm
Yep.
not using those skills ever anymore. And so at what point does that become the norm where you just always have technology, right? So do you think, I probably shouldn't even ask you this, but do you think that that is going to ruin society?
No, because that's math, right? So you're still, and even with your calculator, it's a lot faster to just know 2 plus 2 is
Mhm.
4, right? Than to put it into your calculator, put it in the
Until Elon implants that thing in your brain and it's just there
right.
because it's
Right.
coming.
Right.
It's
I
coming.
mean, so we have all sorts of different learners. Our learners, we have some that have disabilities or diagnosed with some sort of disability. We have learners that are just a little behind because they missed some instruction or didn't have good instruction. And then we have students that are gifted and parents are looking for them to be accelerated. So we have a learner right now that we're starting like PSAT stuff with. And as she gets into like the really complicated math, we'll let her use the calculator because it just makes more sense. But she
Mhm.
could 100% do it without it. With that
Interesting.
piece. Yeah.
Yeah. What percentage of your students are people that are, again, kind of got left behind that progression of grades and you're trying to catch them up versus accelerate?
Oh, probably 60% is behind, if not more,
Okay.
60, 70%. And then
Hmm.
even we have what schools would call twice exceptional. I don't love labels in general, but that they have a higher IQ, so they're identified gifted, but they're behind in math or reading. And it's the same reason that our other kids are behind in math or reading. They just didn't get the appropriate instruction to build those skills. And so I've never had a learner that didn't progress. Like kids progress at different rates, right?
Hmm.
But all of our kids are progressing because the way they learn is the same as far as repeated deliberate practice then being reinforced. The skills they have to work on and the chunks that we can work on at a time might be different, but everybody learns in the same way.
It almost sounds to me like performance strength coaching for education,
There you
right?
go.
Like you can
I'll
go to
run
your,
that by the marketing department. Yeah.
yeah, like you got gym
Exactly what it
class,
is. Yep.
you go to gym class, you do your basic skills and you kind of whatever. But like if you want to be good, like that's not enough.
Right.
You gotta learn,
Cognitive fitness, where that's what we're
yeah,
building. So
yeah.
all our learners come 4 to 5 days a week. That's a requirement. I won't let them come less than that because you want to be practicing more days than you're not. So you'd never
Mm.
just go to CrossFit 1 day a week and expect to get stronger.
You'll get
Um,
hurt is what you'll get.
right, right. Or like You can't practice your violin 1 day a week and expect to get better. You don't have
Right.
soccer practice 1 day a week. So it's that same idea with academics. So, and explain it that way, parents are on board and they get flexible with how to get the kids here. Um, we do hybrid. So we have some kids that come in twice a week and then are online twice a week. We have some kids that are all online, but we are practicing these skills with them 4 days a week minimum.
Have you seen a change in the things that you're seeing with technology? um, I have another client who's a researcher and looking at little kids, but we were chatting one day and she was saying that kids are losing handwriting skills because they're all on tablets and they're typing. Are you seeing differences, or is that just kind of always been part of what you've been around?
I've even seen it just with COVID with the handwriting. Um,
Hmm.
so we do so we teach in different sensory modalities and we talk about them as learning channels. So if they see the problem for math and they're writing the answer, that's a see write. They see it, they write it. And then we also teach as a hearsay. So they hear the problem and they say the answer. So we're teaching just hitting all those different ways so that you're fluent. Um, but I have seen kids getting tired quicker on the C writes. And C write typically is easier. The aim is lower. Um, and I'm seeing kids get fluent in hearsay before they get fluent in C write. And I actually just
Interesting.
got 2 emails this week about parents wanting penmanship this summer because the kids are now back in school and having to write. So I do think, and again, it was never taught to fluency, so not doing it for a few months is going to affect that skill.
Yeah. So every time you kind of say something, we're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, we were doing stupid like health insurance stuff, right? Because health insurance is annoying. And so we had a baby and we get all these bills and they build it in the wrong tier and it was all over the place. So my wife's like talking me through this phone call she had of, okay, so it was this number, it was this amount, and then they charge it at this, but it's supposed to be this. And like it was 2 seconds in, I was like, I need to see it. Like I can't, like I don't do well with that. I have to have the visual piece of it. And I've always known that about myself. I just assumed it was the way I was built, but like that is something I should have trained probably as a younger child,
Yep. Oh,
or
that's
maybe
a
still today.
whole nother box. Um, so there's something called learning styles, and
Right.
there are people that have built curriculums on learning styles and
Mm-hmm.
assessments on learning styles. What the research shows is learning styles are not a thing. You're better at the one that has been reinforced, right? So you're not born with an innate ability to be better at a see write than or a visual learner or an auditory learner.
Mm-hmm.
You're better because that's what you've been trained to be better at. So our goal would be like if I see a kid is really strong at see write but not so strong at hearsay, I'm not going to just be like, all right, well, forget about hearsay, we'll just train them this way. I'm going to say, no, we're going to train hearsay more, right? Because you need to be in both of those, both being able to do it both ways.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna just get worse because I'm gonna like my conversation with my wife, like, let me see the number, like pull up the app, let me see it, right? Like I needed, I didn't even want to play the game. um
Right.
which is what we say about like posture and weaknesses, like, oh, if your hip's weak, if you don't work on it, you're just going to keep adapting away from it, and it's going to not get weaker, but well, maybe it will, but you're going to just avoid it, right? So it's the problem's going to perpetuate or get worse. And
Yeah. There's
so is the same thing going to happen to me? Like when I'm older, I'm going to be all,
Actually, we do some
all
hearsay work. Yeah.
do you
And we
have
use
an adult program?
we do, we'll work with adults, absolutely. But you think about that with like sometimes in education, we over accommodate kids. So we're like, oh, they're a visual learner. So we're going to provide them with a visual of every lecture instead of,
Interesting.
or, oh, we're going to give them voice to text or speech to text. Instead of teaching them the skills that they're lacking, we're just going to accommodate. And then these poor kids get in the real world where those accommodations aren't there and they have a hard time. So yeah, it's really important that yes, you might be a visual learner and that you prefer that method, but that means that we should also be building up that channel that's harder for you.
Yeah, so that's so cool. um and we kind of like, I think that's going to be the trend in the fitness right now. Like People hurt their backs when they're flexed and rotated. So if you're going to bend and pick something off the floor and you have to twist, that's where your back gets hurt typically, right? And we know that. So in exercise in the gym, we avoid that position, right? Never flex your spine. No exercises where your spine's bent. Let's never flex. Let's never flex. Well, the real world happens and your spine has to flex, and then you're in trouble because you
Right.
don't know how to do it. So it's like we've taken the training and we've taken all the scary positions away, the things that are harder or more challenging. And like it's almost like we're making ourselves softer. And as a PT, I'm guilty of it, right? Like there was a point in my career where I'm like, hey, don't, let's keep the spine straight, stiff, never flex. Keep the knees back. Don't let the knees go too far forward. Don't let it go to the inside. And now I'm like, why don't we train this in a controlled environment? Because it's going to happen. Like your knee's going to end up in, your back's going to end up flexed. Like let's train these bad spots. And when I'm hearing you talk about this learning piece, it just sounds the same to me. Like, all
Yeah.
right, I get that you're better at this, and that's great, but let's train what you're not,
Right. Yep. That's funny
Yeah.
because I hurt my back Christmas Eve workout, just being dumb and thinking I could do more weight than I could. And so even though I know all this, it's harder to apply it, right? Especially
Yeah.
if it's not your area specialty. So I asked Kara, like, should I stop working out? She's like, well, no, still come, just do these modified versions. So exactly what you're talking about. My first instinct was like, just don't do any of it, as opposed to, yeah, continuing it, just making sure you're doing it the right way.
Well, you will get people that tell you to just don't do, right? Like, so I always couch it to my clients is you got two choices, right? Like if it hurts to bend your back, you could just never do it again, and it probably won't hurt again. Just never do it. But who can live like that, right? So your other choice is train to be good at it, right? So be controlled, be intentional, be deliberate about how you do it, but let's train that position and get so strong at that position that anything in the real world's fine, right? Like that's the idea.
And
If
get
I got to pick
strong.
something off the floor, I shouldn't have to think.
Right. That's every answer for, I'm like, my foot's cramping. What should I, she's like, just get your foot stronger, get your core stronger, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, to some degree, right? And I'm sure it's the same in your world, but there's so many variables to that. But I think the concept of, training your weak spots is very similar. Like develop the stuff you're not good at.
Right. Yeah, the science is out there. Our school systems are just really far behind in applying them. So
You,
that's kind of our mission to hope to change that.
yeah. I mean, like I look at the medical system and PTs, and you're like, well, I went to PT and I didn't get this. Why? Like they're in a system where it's just not possible, right? They're seeing too many people at once. Everything's moving too fast. They don't have enough time. Like it's not the person's fault. It's just the system.
100%.
Is that
100% is not teachers' faults. Teachers are not trained in the behavioral science. They maybe get one course in our science, and it's usually focused on like addressing challenging behavior or classroom management.
Mhm.
They're not, yeah, the university systems are not training it. There's a huge divide in many universities between the general education and the special education and teaching differently. And then philosophies are different. And then also the resources in the classroom and the support just aren't there. Now, that's not to say we can't do better in groups. 100%. What we do, we can apply in groups. Active
Mhm.
responding, teacher talking less, student talking more. We can work on building that fluency. That doesn't have to be a one-on-one thing, practicing those skills. And then the whole moving up grade levels, being mastery based and as opposed to just moving kids. And there are some schools that are doing that. So our school systems can definitely get better, but I 100% am not blaming teachers. Teachers are saints. They just don't have the training and the support that they need. And
Yeah.
that's why I think the turnover rate for teachers in the first 2 years it's outrageous. And it's because they get there and they realize that they don't have the training and the support that they need to do that job.
Yeah. It's got to be near impossible.
Mhm.
And the logistics of, right, like some of it's a logistics game of, okay, next grade you're on this schedule, this is your new class schedule, this is the bus, this is the, right, like it'd be interesting to see, could you, all right, look, in English, you've passed this skill set, you move to this. In reading, you've done this, but in math, hey, we're gonna, um,
Yeah, and
but
there's schools
the
doing that.
logistics of doing that's got to be a nightmare.
Maybe, but there's people places doing it for sure.
At
Yeah.
scale, like big schools, like.
Yeah, there's states doing it. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah.
Where?
I knew you were gonna ask me that. I'd have to
I
look it
had
up.
to, right?
But
Yeah.
Ohio's supposed to be getting away from like giving grades and just moving to a mastery based system. Like you have to master these skills. Now, when I say master in the school district, they're not doing rate yet. They're
Mhm.
doing accuracy, which is just half of being fluent, right? You have to be able to do it at a rate that's optimal for that skill. But they're at least going towards that and at least looking at the accuracy.
So
But there
they'll
are
get a.
schools that use our science. So I'm a behavior analyst, and then applied behavior analysis is a science. It's an umbrella, and under it, there's obviously different areas. So our focus is called precision teaching, and that's the science of using the chart that we use and then using that rate-based instruction. So there are schools that do it.
That's interesting. So when you say they're getting away from a grade-based system, it'll be like pass fail kind of a thing
Yeah,
to move.
like you've mastered the skill or you haven't mastered the skill. And again, I'm using mastery the way they use it
Mhm.
loosely, but yes,
Hmm.
that's the goal. That's the idea.
That's
There's
interesting.
there is a general consensus that that's the best way. It's just figuring out, like you said, the logistics of getting schools to
How do you
change that.
how do you move people through, and how do they progress? Um, that makes sense to when you look at the ABCD thing, right? It's you. I don't know. As a student, you're like, well, how hard do I want to work to get the grade, right? Like, and then once you're A level, what's the incentive to do more, right? Like,
Yep.
there's interesting little dynamic. Like, you're almost training. It reminds me of a salaried job, right? Like, you pick which grade you want or what salary chain you need. How do I do the least amount of work to accomplish that goal, right? Like, that's almost how we're training our students in my mind.
Yep.
um
It's
I
exactly.
again, the school wasn't terrible for me, but Spanish was always like, I had to work a little bit at Spanish. And all the way through high school, I got B's in Spanish. And my mom's like, well, if you just got an A, you'd have a 4.0. Like, I know, but I don't want to.
What you're talking about, we call behavioral ceiling. So we're putting a ceiling on what they
Yeah.
can do. So if you're only looking at accuracy, exactly. Well, I got that A, there's nothing else I can do. Well, if you're looking at rate, there is something more you can do, right? So when we're
Mm-hmm.
doing math facts or reading or whatever, we have twice the number of words or facts on that sheet that they're going to be able to get through in that time. So we're not making that behavioral ceiling. It's called free operant. We're letting them get in as many responses as
Wherever
they
they can get,
can. Mm-hmm. Yep.
which is how you'd hope, right? The rest of life kind of goes, right? You kind of keep working, you're not putting ceilings on yourself. um
Right.
yeah, that's an interesting little twist to that whole, like, kind of at a macro scale of, hey, what are we training kids to do? And as they it almost seems like you're setting them up to be employees, right? Is kind of how I feel, looking back at it. You know, but that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting thing. Um, the other piece, kind of changing topics, not so gracefully, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the neuroplasticity side as we kind of wrap up, because in pain science, motor learning, the changing the brain, the plasticity of the brain is certainly an important piece. How do you think that fits into what you guys are doing?
Exactly the same. Yeah. So there is research that shows that building habits, right? So that's what we're doing is we're building these academic habits, can change the makeup of the brain. So have you heard of about the study of the taxi drivers in London, I believe?
No.
So they have to memorize the maps of the streets. They have to know, they have to have memorized. There's like a test they take. And there's actually they did a study that showed as they learn this information and they memorize it, their brains change. There's like a section of their brain that gets bigger. So we know that learning affects the brain. And there's research also that shows that behavioral interventions can be just as successful in some cases as medication. And it's having that same change in the brain, whether you're giving behavioral interventions or you're doing medication or like a combination. So yeah, we're changing the brain with building those behavioral habits.
Yeah, I definitely want to know the physiology of it now. Like,
I can give you some resources that might get
I'd
into
I'd I'd
that.
love
Yeah.
to dive into that a little bit, because it'd be, again, trying to link that cognitive training versus physical training. Like, we know exercise does similar things, right? People with chronic pain, we can see, plastic changes in the brain. Seems to include some type of, like, there's got to be a little extra stimulus to it, like a cognitive stimulus or a stress scenario to it. But there's ways to do it with exercise. So yeah, I wonder, what is the physiology in the background of that, and then how do we maximize it? Because I'm sure there's also a fatigue component, right? The same. Do you have to fatigue it to make it happen? Can you train the endurance to last longer? Like, those kinds of questions. If I want a muscle to adapt, I got to fatigue it enough that I create stress, right? I got to get enough into that stress. Is learning the same way? Do you have to stress it enough to make it happen?
I I, I want to say yes, but I mean, the kids aren't walking out of here exhausted, like
Oh yeah,
sweaty,
yeah.
right?
Right.
So,
No, yeah.
but yeah, you do have to like shape that behavior and make it incrementally longer so that they get to where we want them to be for optimal performance.
Is it dosed? Like, like if I'm going to give somebody a couch to 5K program, right? Like, you increase your mileage by 10% each week. Is yours
100%.
dosed as well?
Yep. So we call it
Volumed?
shaping, same thing. Yeah, so we'll start, if we have math facts, we'll start at 15 seconds. And then once they hit the aim for 15 seconds, then we do 30 seconds. And then once they hit the aim for 30 seconds, we move to a minute. And then to pass the program, they have to do it at a minute. That's math facts, and that's the prescribed way. Every kid is a little bit different. So if we have a kid who has a lot of attention issues, we might do 10 seconds, right? And then build up from there. We change the dose, like, so we might just be we work on what we call fact families. So it's just like the group of facts that we're working on. Some kids, we do 3 fact families at a time. Some we do 6 fact families at a time, and then we like increase from there. So everything we do is exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Very interesting. Can you overtrain?
You mean like too often, or to the skill to?
Again, I'm just kind of linking the endurance stuff, but like, if I progress somebody too fast, things start to, like, resting heart rate gets worse. They don't sleep as
Yeah,
well. They, you can
I don't.
wreck the
Yeah,
system a little bit.
I
Neural
don't
fatigue.
know about it that way, but what we sometimes see is kids want to go fast. And so then their accuracy drops, right? They're making more errors. So we slow them down and we work on the accuracy. We call that skill of the timing and doing the problems frequency building. You can't frequency build with a skill that you don't know, right? So we teach the skill, we build accuracy, and then we build the fluency and the rate piece. So there are times where we'll see the kid just want to go fast right away, and then we have to slow them down, and they're reinforced for corrects as opposed to how many they get done, and then we build up that rate. So we see a little bit of that. Yeah, and if we jump too far, and because we're collecting data on every single timing, we'll know within 1 or 2 timings that was too much of a jump, and we call it a slice back. So we'll come back to where they need to be. So that's what's nice about it all being one-on-one, is everything is individualized, and our coaches are trained to make those decisions during every session, which is why we get such great progress.
Yeah, it's linear programming in weightlifting. You build, build. If they overtrain, you cut back and then you build it back through. And it's literally the same. I shouldn't say that, but it seems very similar to how you would literally train somebody in a weightlifting program.
Yeah, it all comes to instructional design and just different fields. And
pretty
again,
wild.
education is just behind. They're just behind.
And I'm sure if you asked Aaron and Kara that speed increase or see accuracy fails with increased speed, you would find that in CrossFit.
I know it. I did the open workout this morning. I know it.
How'd
Yeah.
that go? How'd that
Oh
go?
God, 2 minutes in, I'm like, man, my pace was way too fast to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
had some fun conversation with Aaron about like the similarities between, what we do and yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest. When Kara first like kind of messaged me, and she's like, "We're going to talk about fit learning," and I'm like, "How does this link? Like, how are we going to do this?" And then like the more we get into this, I'm like, it's the same thing. Like, it's very like the learning setup, and it's interesting to hear the programming side. Of course, I've never thought about it from an education standpoint, but that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, all behaviors learn the same way by practice and
Mm-hmm.
reinforcement. So whether that's challenging behavior we don't want to see from our children, right? Or if it's a sport or a musical instrument, how we interact with our spouses, it's all the same. It's built on, the behavior that's practiced and the behavior that's reinforced.
You
So yeah,
better.
it's a cool way to kind of look at the world once you're in our science. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Is it a use it or lose it thing too?
What do you mean? What part?
Like in fitness, if you don't back squat for a while, your back squat's going to suck.
Oh,
You come back to it a month later.
yeah.
Um, do you
Ideally,
see that with
no.
your students?
No, because we're training to that fluent level, and part of fluency is you never lose it, right? So, like, think about riding a bike. If you haven't ridden a bike in 5 years, you can probably still jump on the bike and ride it. So we don't see that summer slide where kids lose. I mean, if schools were teaching this way, they wouldn't have to spend August and September reviewing everything from last year. There's so much learning time lost based on that reviewing.
Mm-hmm.
So no, our kids keep up those skills and then they use them as they progress.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I always say in weightlifting, like there's certain things that you feel like you can always kind of get away. Like once you've trained to a certain level, you can still kind of do. But then there's some like the specialty stuff falls off quick, and probably because you're not fluent at the specialty stuff, right? Like you can do it, but you're not real good at, you're right,
Right. Yeah. You never kind of became fluent. And
yeah,
then there's also obviously the strength aspect
sure.
in fitness that we don't necessarily have that piece.
But a lot of that's brain. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the strength aspects are neural, like the timing of activating which muscle fibers, how coordinated those muscle fibers are in timing. Some of it's just pure size and force, but most or a lot is neural and timing the muscle contraction, right? Because there's always some muscle fiber in reserve. It's what your brain will let you use. So I think the strength training piece is such a learning skill, which is probably why we see so many similarities. I'm pretty fascinated by it. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Well, hey, this was fun. We're coming up on that hour mark, I guess. I usually like to wrap up with, what do you think you're going to be most into next year? Like things you're looking forward to learning more about, or things that you're kind of maybe seeing in the profession on the horizon, or what you want to see.
Well, you've given me some things to think about when it comes to the physiology and that piece of it. I am really hoping. So we have this down literally to a science. We follow the science at PHYT. We make awesome progress with our kids, but we're only hitting like this much of the kids out there, right? So part of PHYT's overall mission is to change education across the world. So I'm hoping to get into some schools and start doing some training to help train staff in either our method or at least pieces of it, like just the fluency building. If they would just start giving kids more practice, that would make a difference. So that's kind of on the horizon for me. Yeah, and just being able to hit more kids and to be able to get our science out there.
With that mission in mind, and I think I struggle with that as well, right? Like if I got my hands on somebody and I'm coaching them one-on-one, like we make improvements. But what number of people am I going to see in my career, right? Like, how many people can you reach in that sense? And I think digital helps. But anyway, with that in mind, what are things that parents could do at home? Like, you got the teacher side of it, but what about parents? Like, I got a couple little ones at home. What are things that you could be doing that are simple that maybe somebody listening could do at home?
So short incremental practice, right? So setting that timer and doing your flashcards for 30 seconds. And then part of what makes our program so reinforcing and that kids really enjoy it is they earn points. So when they get a personal best, meaning let's say we do 15-second timing, they get 8 problems. We do it again, they get 9 problems. That's the most they've ever gotten. They get points for that. They earn points. And here, I'll show you. We have these clickers.
So it's like an AMRAP for
Yeah.
flashcards. Many reps as you can get.
We count all responses on these. I have a silent one, so but as a kid's responding, I'm counting. And then they have one where they count their points. So they get a personal best, they earn 10 points and they count 10. And so our goal is 10 personal bests a session. And then we have a prize wall that they use their points to buy things off of. So that's one way. That is a big buy-in when kids first start with us because they have low confidence. They don't like math or they don't like reading because they haven't been successful in it. But because we're collecting data on everything, they start to get that internal motivation where they want to beat their score. So yesterday I had a little guy who just started with us who got a personal best. I'm like, yes. So, and they start to see that they're getting better and their confidence grows and their progress grows. So that data piece is huge. So if you're just doing flashcards for 30 seconds, like, okay, you got 5 that time. Awesome. Let's try for 6. Let's try for 7. But remember, it has to be a skill that they're somewhat accurate at. Errors are okay, but we don't want to train to fluency. So we don't want to train something that they're getting a bunch of errors. So that piece, timers are the best thing that were ever created. We use that when I do parent training, we use them for screen time. It's much easier to say the timer said the time's up instead of saying mom or dad saying the time's up. We use timers for 10 minutes of homework and then a 10-minute break and then 5 minutes of homework and then a 5-minute break or any of those pieces. So I can't recommend getting a timer more. It's the best tool out there.
I get it. Just sounds like, different exercise program, like minute on, minute off, minute on, minute off, 2 on, 2 off, right? That's all kind of the same.
Same thing. Yep, you're building that skill up.
And then you're gamifying it too, right? Which we're seeing in like those targets, those goals, the gamification of learn. That's interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, and just the reinforcement, like at the verbal praise when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, like it's so underestimated how influential that is. Kids will do anything for attention, regardless if it's positive or negative. So when they're doing what you want them to be doing, giving lots of positive praise, specific, I love how you picked up that toy. Now no one's going to trip over it, or all of those pieces. And it makes it a lot easier to manage and ignore when the behavior isn't what you want it to be. But yeah, all that. So we do both. We do the verbal praise and then we do the points. And then, I have a kid who's at 10,000 points because they're just not as motivating to him anymore. What is motivating to him is seeing his progress and knowing that, he's moved up 2 grade levels. Yeah.
Yeah. How young can you start?
3.
3.
So that
I'm about to go tie my 2.5-year-old daughter on some flashcards.
we started implementing our science when they're basically about 2, right? Because before that you have to tend to them when they cry. So 2 is kind of start changing that up. But yeah, our services start at 3, and those aren't typically kids that are behind. They're just kids that the parent wants a little boost of getting them ready for school.
Yeah. What is the age range, as we wrap up, what are the age ranges that you guys work with? Who is your population? Like, who should go to your website and check out more?
Any parent. So we start, like I said, we started at 3 skills. And that is a lot of learning to learn. So sitting, following directions, and then we get into all the pre-academic skills for that one. And then
you cut out on the Zoom feed. I don't know how it's going to record. What age did you say you start at?
We start at 3 with the Little Fits program, which is school readiness through the end of 1st grade. And some of that is how to learn. So how to sit, how to follow directions, those pieces, and then all the academic skills. And then we would go through adult. Our program works for adults. But we have high schoolers right now, our oldest. And then the majority of our students are behind a little bit. So not necessarily have a diagnosis of any sort or special education services, but they're behind their peers academically. And so the parents looking to catch them up. We do have students that have learning disabilities. We have students that have autism. And then we have students that are identified gifted. We have that range, but I would say the majority are a little behind and looking for that to be caught up.
And then we'll link everything, but for people listening, where do they find out more?
Our website, if you just Google Fit Learning Cleveland, you'll find our website, our Google page. If you're listening and you're not in Cleveland, Fit Learning, I think it's just .com, is like the national site for other centers, but we do remote. So I have learners in Arizona, I have learners in Kentucky. Yeah, so we're kind of all over the place. I would say half my learners right now are online.
Very cool. Very cool. And for anybody local, you're in Beechwood, correct?
I'm in Pepper Pike.
Pepper Pike.
Yep. Looking at a Westlake location within the next 6 months to a year, hopefully.
That's exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
Right next to the CrossFit gym.
Yeah, it's like closer to the gym.
Double book them.
Aaron and I are already thinking about how we could connect kid CrossFit classes. Or
he's the best at, like, he's so good at that, like pulling in people and kind of building those. I mean, he is very good at that.
Build a community.
Yes, he is very good, and maximizing people's skill sets so that like his community gets a little taste of all of it. Is you know, I met him recently through Kara, and like he is just so good at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a special place. I'm lucky to be part of that community.
Yeah, he's done a great job there. All right, well, hey, this was fun. Anything else you want to leave, and otherwise we'll wrap it up?
I don't think so. I'm all set.
All right, Corinne, that was great. Thank you. And yeah, guys, check it out. Thanks for watching and supporting the channel. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Let us know in the comments below what you liked, what you disliked, what you'd like to hear more of, and any questions we can help answer. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.